Hello, everybody. I'm joined today by Owen to talk about the republication of his grandfather's book, The Silver Trumpet. And people who know my channel will know that I've talked a little bit about Owen Barfield before. And if you've read my music theory books, you'll see there's some quotes from Barfield because I love getting those in the book. But for people who don't know Owen Barfield, I'm joined today by Owen Barfield's grandson, Owen. And I wondered if you could give us a little bit of a potted history, a little bit of background about your grandfather and his relation with C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and what might be known as the Inklings, but again, that might be new to some people.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thanks to your listeners as well for being there and here. Well, grandfather described himself in his own words as the first and last Inkling, and that's a sort of almost a biblical reference, a relationship to Saint John in John's Gospel, the beginning and the end, if you like. So there was a strong connection there to the Logos and the Word and to spirituality, which grandfather very much identified. And from a young age, he started having kind of inkling moments, which brought him to his philosophy, if you like. And in 1919, in his first term at Oxford University, he met C.S. Lewis, introduced by a mutual friend. And the two got on very well together because both of them considered themselves poets at the time. And they
Hmm.
were the same age, grandfather, I think, a month older. And had a lot of shared experiences, went through university. And at that time, C.S. Lewis was a very hard atheist, known to be an atheist. And grandfather developed from about 1922, that sort of period, what they called the Great War. And through that Great War, grandfather slowly convinced and converted C.S. Lewis first to theism, and then with the help of others such as Tolkien and Charles Williams to Christianity. And thereafter, Lewis became known as a great Christian apologist. But that journey through to Christianity was very much taken with grandfather leading him. Now, grandfather himself was a leading anthroposophist, and he was a founding father of the Anthroposophical Society of Great Britain, which was founded in 1923, the year that grandfather got married. And so the grandfather's sort of got various hats. He's got the Inkling hat, a leadership role within anthroposophy, which is the works of Rudolf Steiner. Professionally, he was first a poet author, then he was a lawyer, and then he was a professor. He toured America. So these three periods of his life were about equal, 33 years each, and
Hmm.
he died aged 99. And when he died, I was aged 28, and I was the sole grandchild. So I had a quite strong and close connection with him. I'd regularly visit him. I was his executor on his will, but not for his literary papers. He had appointed four academics for that, three in America. I only became his literary trustee when the others were too old and not much was happening, and I was sort of making inquiries, and bit by bit they'd resign and hand over their responsibilities to me. And that started in the year 2006. So from then, I've been his literary executor, and it slowly been building up. And one of the things I've been doing is publishing his books, and there's still a lot more to publish. But the very last one that we published, which was just a couple of months ago, was The Silver Trumpet, which is why I think Paul is talking to me now.
Yes, indeed. So, just going back a little bit, Owen. So you say about your grandfather when he was at school, he had quite a moment, didn't he, with his friend when they were in class? And was that? Would you say
Yeah.
that's one of those kind of if you could share that with us? 'Cause I think that's lovely.
Yeah, so these are kind of inkling moments that developed his philosophy. And grandfather's philosophy was one about poetic imagination, and his theme, and grandfather coined the term the evolution of consciousness.
Hmm.
He coined that in his book History in English Words, which was published in 1926. So that phrase was coined by
Or was
grandfather.
he writing that about the same time as this, Owen? Or
Yeah, so
right,
that book had been written in 1923 and it
right,
was
okay,
published in 25. So the year after that one was published, History in English Words was published.
right,
Oh, wow,
okay,
you got it there.
yeah, yeah, lovely.
Um, But all this kind of encapsulates the philosophy, and that philosophy, if you like, started when he was at school, which was Highgate School, which is a secondary school in the north of London. I also went to that same school. Uh, I probably sat in the same classroom that he did because it was a bit of an old-fashioned school when I was there.
Hmm.
And he was sat next to his best friend, who is Cecil Harwood. And Cecil Harwood was the joint founder, founding member of the Anthroposophic Society, and he was a chairman for the Anthroposophic Society for about 46 years. They were both serving on the council there. Anyway, there's his best friend, sat next to him in a Latin class, and they were making a literal translation of a Latin passage. And they came to the word for death, but the literal translation was the man walked out of life. And then that kind of poetical way of referring to something. So instead of saying dying, which is quite a hard word, he's walking out of life. It's got a beauty to it. It's got a
Hmm.
wider meaning. It's got more resonance to it. And this
Hmm.
was a wake-up call for grandfather. And from there on, he was looking for that and building a philosophy around that. So that's from his sort of teenage years at Highgate School.
Hmm. And he suffered a lot at school, didn't he? Owen, with like a stutter and things around that time, didn't he? If I'm, did he struggle
Well,
with his
they
speech?
say this. They say the stutter came with the onset of World War One. So
Right, so that
grandfather
way,
would have
right,
been about, yeah, he would have been about 15 when World War One came.
right,
He left school. He left school. No, he would have been about 17, maybe.
right.
He left school in 1916, basically,
Okay.
which is when his generation of young men had to go off to fight in World War One, and grandfather was called up. Um, he did some training. He was sort of held back. He was joined the Royal Engineers uh, in the Signal Corps, and that gave him other inkling moments because by studying the properties of communication and signaling, he had an experience of electricity. Within electricity, there's a polarity of negative and positive.
Mm,
And
right.
this kind of polarity, which is a Coleridgean word,
Mm,
grandfather very, very much identified. And his whole philosophy, if you like, is based around polarity, as is Coleridge. So grandfather then became a great exponent and explainer of Coleridge. In fact, he's got a book called What Coleridge Thought, which is by
wonderful.
some said to be the best book on Coleridge ever written.
Yeah, wonderful.
So that so then he became kind of interested in these matters, and there was a sort of invisible, mysterious hand which held him back and protected him during the war. And as soon as the armistice was called, grandfather was sent to Belgium.
Right. Okay.
Um, but of course, it was a good time to arrive. There was no longer a war. Everybody else was busy trying to demob and get home, but grandfather just arrived. So he had all these military resources. He had access to horse riding, motorbike riding, foreign troops, colonial people who'd come to fight. So it's this University of Life experience, if you like, which he was very much enriched with, and particularly he had access to the whole library system of Great Britain because the military had commandeered this kind of getting the books to the front for our soldier, whatever the soldier wants to keep them happy. And that whole system was still in place. So grandfather could order any book from any place in Britain, and there it was delivered to him instantly.
Wow, that's wonderful. And then he ended up going to law, didn't he? If we took at the three periods of his life, would you say
So
he
the
became a
law is the
lawyer?
middle period, and he would
Right.
have been around about 1930 when he decided that. Then he took a law degree at Oxford from 30 to 33,
Okay.
graduated in 33, but had already joined the family law firm around about 1931, and that was in London. The firm is called Barfield and Barfield, so he joined with his father, and it was a generational firm, and his father wanted to pass it on to the next generation. His older brother Harry was doing important war work as a scientist,
Right.
um, and so it was the younger brother Owen who agreed to go into the law, and also his kind of being an author and being a poet, his career hadn't really taken off, if you like. He was working a bit as an editor and
Right.
writing, but not particularly successful. He had written a very long novel called English People, and he wrote that just before he took the decision to go into the law, but he couldn't find a publisher for it. It was just not the right time for that kind of material.
And
If
am
that
I
had been
right? Is
published,
that not complete then, that book, Owen? Or English
well,
people?
that book is yet to be published. It's still
Yeah,
unpublished.
yeah,
And one of the things that's holding it back is that one of the agents who was considering it lost some of the chapters, and
right,
those chapters were never rewritten. People who have read the whole book says you can get the sense of the book without those chapters. It
right.
doesn't hold back the book, but it is a bit of a shame that a portion, maybe 15%, got lost in that moment.
Mm. And on this channel, we talk a lot about music now. I've talked to you before about your grandfather. You said he had a piano uh, but when he was older in his house. And so he was a dancer, he was a very good dancer, wasn't he?
Yeah, so dancing was grandfather's thing. At school, he was a gymnastics.
Right.
He represented the school at gymnastics, and from gymnastics, it's an easy move into dance. He responded to an advert calling for male dancers to join a tour group of Cornwall when he was in his first year at university.
Hmm.
He had such a good time that summer that he went again the following summer and he brought his best friend Cecil Harwood with him. So the two of them were the male dancers.
Wonderful.
And on that dance tour, the organizer was the lady who would then become his wife. Maud Dewey was the organizer for that. So he kind of met through dance. And Maud was a sort of theatrical person, a choreographer. She was very much into music and dance as well. And that's what they had in common all their lives. In fact, all their lives they danced together and they always had
Mhm.
access to live music and a space in which to perform and to create. And then later,
Mhm.
when Eurythmy, which is a sort of, it's a kind of, it's a spiritual expression, but a bodily experience. Some people think it looks like music, but it's not
Mm.
music or dance. But he was very keen on Eurythmy, and he founded the London Eurythmy School and brought Eurythmy to the UK, which is a very important healing art, actually.
So important. And so when did he first meet C.S. Lewis then? Do you know about
He
the
first
period?
met C.S. Lewis in that first term in 1919 because it
Right.
took him that long to be demobbed.
Did it? Right, okay. And when did he meet Tolkien? Do you know when
Yeah, they met in 1926.
okay.
So the year that C.S. Lewis got his first university job, um, it was in the English faculty. So Lewis met Tolkien that year, and very soon afterwards, Lewis introduced Tolkien to grandfather.
Hmm.
And the thing that Lewis and grandfather did was go on these long walks, particularly at Easter time, but also during the term together. But at Easter time, they go on a particularly long walk. And on at least two of those occasions, Tolkien joined them on the long walks. And we can assume that he would have been around for the shorter ones as well when grandfather was in Oxford.
Hmm. And you know, Tolkien would stop himself, wouldn't he, at some of the lectures because of some of the things your grandfather had said to him.
Yeah. So particularly the early works. So we've mentioned history and English words. Now,
Yeah.
Tolkien, when he described himself as a philologist, which means he had an interest in words.
Hmm.
That's how he saw himself. That's how he viewed himself as a philologist. And grandfather, you could say, was a philologist. He'd written and published this book, History in English Words. It was
Yeah.
all about words. So grandfather was a great philologist. So Tolkien admired him at that level. Then, when Tolkien had kids, Lewis lent him his own copy of The Silver Trumpet, and
Hmm.
Tolkien read it out loud to his kids. And he was amazed at how his kids responded to it. But he could also sort of see the philosophy behind it because he knew grandfather. So,
Hmm.
knowing what grandfather was trying to communicate and how he communicated it through this fairy tale at such an early stage and had it published and everything with illustrations,
Hmm.
kind of gave Tolkien an idea. Well, I don't know, maybe I could do something like this. So it was a proof of concept book, which Lewis also took as a proof of concept. But Lewis also wanted to write his children's book, which had more to it behind it and
Hmm.
illustrated. So all three of them wanted to do it. Grandfather did it first, and the other two sort of built on that, if you like. Of course, Lewis, when he wrote his first one, which was The Lion and the Witch and Wardrobe, he dedicated that to Lucy Barfield, my aunt,
Mm.
grandfather's daughter because he was her godfather and he
Mm.
took his responsibility of godfather seriously and he wanted to do something for Lucy in a sort of a kind of teaching, guardian kind of way. And so he wrote that book for her. And that's what the dedication says. I dedicate it to you and I'm writing it for you.
Hmm. That's so wonderful. So in a way, this was the first of the fairy stories, if you like, of the Inklings
Yeah.
by quite
And
some
this name,
time.
Lucy,
Mm.
sorry to
Oh
interrupt, but
no.
this late name Lucy is important as well because Lucy for the Inklings so embodies the spirit of Englishness, which is one of the things that they cared about. And so you have
Hmm.
Lucy in the Narnia stories. You have grandfather naming his daughter Lucy. But before he had Lucy, he'd written in this big novel, English People, a Marchen, which is like a myth allegory, which he
Hmm.
embeds inside the long story. And we have published that as The Rose on the Ash Heap.
Yes.
In the novel, the title is The Third Thing. Um, the third thing being a reference to polarity, where you have two polarities, you create a third thing. So
Yeah.
polarity is always there. So the third thing is a lovely Marchen, and the kind of the goddess figure, the spiritual figure, the quest figure is called Lucy as well.
Hmm. So for people who maybe don't know, then this leads to the Inklings and their gatherings to read each other's stories. Could you say a little bit about that for people who are not familiar with this term, the Inklings?
Right. Well, famously, the Inklings sort of met in a pub, and it was like a drinking man's, very male, very humorous, and very drink oriented. Well, I don't think of grandfather as that kind of a person because there's another aspect which is the walking and talking. And so grandfather was more on that side of the Inklings, this walking and talking, which is underemphasized because people like the drinking and boozing aspect. But the walking and talking, I think, is the more significant one. And more research needs to be done into that.
Hmm.
Who was there, where did they go, that kind of thing. People are starting to look into that.
Um, but was
But
your
as I
grandfather
say,
in was your grandfather in London anyway? So maybe he wouldn't have
well,
attended all
grandfather
the
lived
time.
near Oxford in that first third. He lived in the village of Long Crendon,
Right. Okay.
and they had a house there, which they maintained that house.
Right.
Then, when he had to work for the law, he was near Oxford but commuted in. During the war, the Second World War, for example, the family moved back to Long Crendon. So they were always in the sort of vicinity, Oxford. And grandfather says that on a termly basis, he'd go to visit Lewis. He'd stay the Friday night in his rooms in college in Magdalen, and then Saturday they'd move over to the Kilns and he'd spend Saturday night in the Kilns, and then he'd leave on Sunday, and he'd do that on a termly basis. Now we don't know who else was involved in those things, but this is a lot of the sort of material which involves grandfather hasn't really been explored. There's been, as I
Hmm.
think, a deliberate overlooking or a not wanting to go there
Hmm.
because there's a sort of received story, and people like sticking with the received stories, whether it's an accurate one or not. But the more you look into it, and the closer to the truth you get, the more enriched you'll be, and the better the story actually becomes. So I do encourage people to look into it more.
Hmm. And if we think this was 1923, what was it? Was it the 50s for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? I think maybe around that
Yeah,
period.
yeah,
And then
correct.
what's the Hobbit? The 30s. I think I wrote down 37. Yeah.
Yes.
So this was very early, and you mentioned that it was such a big hit for Tolkien and his children.
Yeah, and you asked me the question, Paul, and I got distracted. I'm sorry. So your question was about Tolkien and his links to grandfather. And so just to finish that
Oh yes.
off, grandfather wrote the book Poetic Diction, and I said his theme is romantic, imagination and poetic imagination. And so Poetic Diction, if you like, was grandfather's thesis at university, but it then became published in 1928. Tolkien was very, very influenced by that book. And that's the book that he would say that when he's lecturing and giving a lecture about English literature, he was about to say one thing, then he remembered what he learned from that book, and then he had to have to correct himself and sort of reposition himself and say something else, because that book really did orientate him.
And I've told you before that you had a PDF copy years ago on the website, and I read that to my son when he was 6, and he absolutely he loved the story. And you can tell when my son loves a story because he just runs up and down the room while you're reading it. It's all about movement. It's always, so he absolutely loved the story. So to see it published, and I went through all the pictures with him and asked him what he thought if he imagined the pictures to look like that, and there's some wonderful drawings in the book. So was it a hard job to get this published? Did it take a long time? Did you have a lot of work to do?
Me a long time, but it shouldn't have done, and I apologize to everybody who wanted that out earlier. So my fault. Forgive me.
Mm, mm. And then when we were talking the other week, we were on a call and we had a little moment because there's some two of the characters, the sisters in the book, and one of the guys mentioned this musical instrument, and we had a little moment where we connected this instrument. Do you want to say a little bit about, and then I'll maybe say something about the instrument, but if you want to say a little bit about the two sisters.
Well, what you're referring to is there's two princesses who are twins, and one's called Violetta, and the other one Gamboy, and they are twins. And I had always wondered about the source of that name. But in one of our conversations with other people,
Mm.
they drew the conclusion that these names must have come after this instrument called the viola da gamboy, the gamba, viola da gamba, which
Yeah.
is a medieval instrument. It's a predecessor of a cello. If
Yeah, it's unusual because it has frets on it, which is quite unusual. It has frets on it. And a lot of people think of it as a very delicate instrument, which has to be leant against the leg. So I found that when he said that, I was just like, wow. Oh,
but out of that, I mean, the book is so rich with symbolism that it kind of almost blows my mind. I was just
yeah.
rereading some things before this, and
Mm,
um, I mean, it's the body and soul aspect here, and the musicality of it as well. Um, Kind of the gamboy and the gamba and the bodily aspect of it, and then the kind of the musical aspect of the soul, the
mm,
violetta, the high and the low, um, the melody within the soul, which links in with the trumpet blowing. There's just a lot of
mm.
kind of symbolism which we could have a go at piecing together, but I'm not sure how much time or if you got the inclination to it. But it's a very rich source, a very rich vein to mine this one for symbolism and spiritual symbolism. Just starting with the word silver as well. I mean, the Inklings
Mm,
had a sense of silver being magical, and they use it themselves. Charles Williams in the silver stare, Lewis in the silver chair. You've got
mm,
grandfather with his silver trumpet coming in there. Um, the way silver is used, even to the detail of the silver comb propping up the hair, the spiritual quality of hair, feminine hair particularly, combating evil. I mean, it's just this. We could,
yeah.
with a little bit more preparation, we could have
Yes.
a different kind of conversation.
Well, somebody could certainly dive into that, couldn't they, Owen? It would be rich research.
Very rich, very.
And we,
Also, there's the audio aspects. You're not clairvoyance, but the audio aspect is
mm,
such an interesting thing for our times. It's more important now
mm,
plugging into the music of the cosmos as well, the musical aspects of rhythm. Um, well,
mm.
there's
And
just a
these,
lot. There's a
and
lot there.
like I've written
Um,
recently, these are things that are missing from our society, sadly, in this day and age. And when the trumpet
even,
disappears,
yeah,
we lose everything,
yeah.
don't we? Everything is lost in the silver trumpet.
Yeah. Even the detail of the air thickening and becoming like water. I mean,
Mm,
if grandfather was already reading anthroposophy, this is a reference to Atlantis.
yeah, right. Yeah.
So there's just so many little examples, and it occurred to me that one of the addresses is on Titan Hanger, Titan Hanger Lane. And I thought, well, that's a strange name. Well, it must mean something. And Titanhang is because the house of the Titans, and the Titans are the gods who preceded the Olympian gods. So grandfather's referring to deep mythical. We're going beyond mythology. We're going to pre-mythology gods,
Mm.
which are also known to
Mm.
us. But this is the kind of timescales that grandfather looking back, and he's taken us back into what grandfather calls original participation. So
Mm.
he's always flagging up original participation. Even in this early period, 1923, he's writing about this.
Yeah.
He probably hasn't quite coined the term original participation, but it's what he's thinking about, which is why grandfather said, I've always written the same thing.
Yeah.
There's no early Barfield, later Barfield. I always write the same thing. I might find different ways of saying it, but I'm always saying the same thing. So he's saying, look, be aware of our state and how it was when we enjoyed our original participation,
Mm.
and knowing that we've come from somewhere, ask the question of where we're going. So be aware of where we're going and try to get there. Make sure you don't fall off the path, because the whole goal of humanity is to reach final participation. So please, let's not get lost on the way.
Mm.
The grandfather's got a real message, a real philosophy behind this, which the Inklings were picking up. Now, the thing about Lewis and Tolkien, they were professional men, they were dons, they were in a university position, they had to earn their living. They could only say so much, whereas grandfather was relatively free to say what he wanted or what he really thought. And so he was free. But Lewis was writing for an audience, which is Britain in the 1940s, 1950s. He was very
Mm.
successfully addressing that audience, and it's still valid. But there's Britain in the 1950s. We're not there anymore.
No.
We're talking about the world in the 2020s. Where are we now? In a very
Mm.
different position. We need to look at what grandfather's saying. Now, if grandfather's too challenging, and even what Lewis is saying is too challenging, which it is some people, Britain in the 1940s is still a bit advanced for some people. Well,
Mm.
let them come to it. But they're really signposting Barfield. So you know, I hope more people will catch up and come up to speed, as it were, with the what we need for today.
And I think that's why I got so attracted to your grandfather's work maybe a decade ago because of that. So that would be nice to conclude now for people who've maybe heard you just say original participation. If separate from this story, where would you say would be a good book if they're interested in this term, final participation, original participation? Where would you say would be a
Grandfather's
good place?
grandfather's key book is Saving the Appearances. So when I was 17, I knew grandfather had written books, but I was unaware of this kind of intellectual life of his. I said, "What should I read of yours, grandfather?" And he said, "Saving the Appearances." I tried to when I was 17, but it was a bit over my head. So it's what I should recommend. But I have to recommend it because it is the book
Hmm.
to go to. But don't worry if you don't get on with it. That's the main message. Is don't worry. Maybe a novella. Maybe Eager Spring, which was his last novel novella. There's all different ways in. For some people, the way in is through Worlds Apart, which is a
Hmm.
dialogue
Hmm.
in quite a nice way because you see different people's perspectives and you start get contrast. When you have contrast, then you can see a way through. It's like putting up two shades of yellow. You appreciate the shades of yellow by contrasting one with the other,
Hmm.
and that's what he does with C.S. Lewis. They're both on the same track, but there's shades, and then you've got to sort of choose which shade sort of suits you, if you like. And you only see that when you contrast them. So if you contrast Grandfather with Lewis,
Hmm.
um, which is a challenge I like to put down because people don't do that.
Hmm.
Um, See where it takes you.
Hmm. Well, you can see from you can see from my copy of and endless notes, trying to wrestle with some of the ideas when I first read it. And I've read it a number of times now. What about this one, Owen? I always think this is a nice one
Yeah.
in for people as well. Some of the essays.
Yeah. So Grandfather was an essayist. I've been counting how many essays he's written, and I'm up to about 112, something like that.
Wow,
I
right.
suspect there are more, and I'm going to have a list of all the essays. So that's a collection of his essays. We've published another collection, and there's probably two more collections to go. So there's a lot of essays out there. That's what his main communication was, through essays.
Right. And I think before we finish, we should really briefly mention two books that you just touched upon. But maybe Poetic Diction first, because that's another one for a lot of Barfield fans that they absolutely love that book.
Yeah, that's dedicated to C.S. Lewis. So during that time of the Great War when they really were good friends and sort of going at it hammer and tongs, as Lewis says, on their walks. Again, it's a little bit of a challenging book, but sometimes we need to be challenged. We need to be stretched a
Mm.
bit to get that. But I'll leave it to others to explain it or to elaborate on that.
Yeah, and then History in English Words, which he wrote around the same time as this, is another great book. I found that fascinating how he tracks the evolution of consciousness and language. It's wonderful. It's a one you can reread as well again and again.
Yeah.
But it's been absolutely
Well,
lovely to talk to you, Owen. I could talk to you all day. I think we'll put a link to the Barfield estate so people can explore the books a bit more if they're interested. And they're available on Amazon out of the bookstores and things.
well, thank you for what you do, Paul, and thank you for your interest. And Paul's been a great supporter. He's come along to one or two events, and I know that's not an easy thing to do. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate everything you're doing as well.
Well, I
And the
really,
music aspect is wonderful. We need to build on that music aspect. It really is
yeah.
lovely. And you've
Talk about,
created some sort of pieces which link to Barfield as well.
yes, I have a
I'm
set a couple of the poems, yeah, which I'd like to do more of actually.
Well, we've got a collection of poetry coming out as well. So,
Wonderful.
there's still a lot of unpublished material. So much to do.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Owen. It's been lovely to
All right.
speak with you.
Thank you. You take care.
You too.